I think Jen, you're on mute.
Thanks. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks for your leadership at Unmanned Systems for the Commonwealth. Joining me this morning is Alex Euler, Senior Director of Virginia Venture Partners, and Tom Walker, Founder and CEO of DroneUp. Good morning, Tom and Alex.
Good morning, everyone.
Tom, tell us about your background and experience and what led you to ultimately founding DroneUp. And then what does DroneUp do?
Thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And thank you to VIPC for your support of us, both in terms of statewide and leading us to financial support, and then opportunities for projects that have been very critical to our success. So I just want to start out by extending that thank you. So my background was I was in the military. I was a nuclear engineer on submarines as an enlisted guy, and then became an officer and did a variety of different things, absolutely nothing related to drones. But then after leaving the military, I went to work for my wife in a technology company, and one day realized that drones were going to have a significant impact on society. They weren't a passing fad. I realized that I could walk into Best Buy and for under $2,000 buy a piece of technology. I buy a piece of equipment that had more technology on it than the space shuttle. And so we kind of looked at it and said, like I said, drones are going to have an impact on society, either good or bad. And we decided to start a company and try to have an influence on it in the positive way instead of the negative. As far as what DroneUp does, we're an unmanned aviation technology company. We first started out focusing on traditional drone services. We built a proprietary patented application that now manages a little over 25,000 independent operators in the United States, several thousand in dozens of other countries as well. And then when the pandemic happened, the White House reached out and basically said to several of the leading drone companies, how can drones and their operators aid in the pandemic relief? Many of you have heard me tell this story, and our answer was we had no idea. But we wanted to figure it out. So this is where I refer to the artist formerly known as CIT stepped in, and we went to them and said, we really want to do an operation. We want to bring together 40 or 50 of the brightest drone operators that we have in our network. We want to do this in the middle of the pandemic. We want to do it to basically try to test out how drones could do delivery. There's no contract on the other side. There's no revenue opportunities. But we wanted to just try to figure out how we would even do this. And so at an abandoned college in Lawrenceville, Virginia, with the support of CIT, Go Virginia, and a few others, we literally pulled this thing together. And for 4 days and 3 nights, we just did deliveries over and over and over and over again. And then published a paper called Operation Last Mile. And that led to recognition from Walmart and a few others, and opened the doors for some opportunities. And that moved us into the delivery space. So now today, I would say that we have two significant portions, 3 of our business units. We have our technology division. We have our services division, which still continues to do traditional drone services throughout the country, aerial data collection and inspection. And then we have our delivery side. And in that side, we're the only company that's doing store-to-door deliveries 12 hours a day, 7 days a week in the United States. And that operation is expanding quickly. And as a result, our company, which was 12 full-time people in January of 2021, today we're 205, and by the end of this year we're going to be about 650. So
yeah, that's a great story. I want to touch on that a little bit later, but I didn't realize, Tom, so you were a drone hobbyist or enthusiast before you started the company?
No, in fact, there's a story that my wife loves to tell more than I do. I actually didn't know anything about drones. Went out one Saturday morning and bought a drone, brought it home. And my wife basically likes to go to the beach in the evenings and sit on there and have a bottle of wine. I'm not a big fan. I've seen the water. I was in the Navy. But so she said, how about we go to the beach this evening? You can fly your brand new drone, and I can drink a glass of wine and watch you fly it. And I crashed it into the ocean. the very first night. So $2,000. And I jumped in the water. This is a true story. They're witnesses to this. She told me, you better go get it. She pulled all my stuff out, my wallet, my phone and everything, jumped in the water, immediately got sucked under due to the undercurrent. And while I was pinned to the bottom, the only thing that went through my head is the headline in tomorrow's paper is going to be local businessman dies trying to retrieve drone. And I never did get it back. But the truth was I went home and I called the manufacturer and I said, hey, I didn't crash this drone. This drone crashed itself. I want a replacement. And they said, well, let's log in and take a look. And I said, well, we'll log in and take a look at what? And so we log in, and first the woman who's on the phone with me, she says, well, you were flying in restricted airspace, but we'll come back to that in a minute. And oh, by the way, at the time of the accident, you were flying after twilight, which is illegal, but we'll come back to that. And then, but let's take a look at the stick movement right prior to the crash. And I could see on the screen where she was going with it. And I said, never mind, I hung up. But what I realized at that very moment was how technologically advanced these pieces of equipment were in terms of the ability to control them, in terms of the quality of the video and the sensors. That happened on a Saturday, and on Tuesday, we started the company. And that was the extent of my drone experience the day that we started the company.
Okay, I learned something new. So was that was the eureka moment? Is that when did you really realize that this was a business idea that was worth pursuing?
I don't know that it was at that moment, because the truth was when we first started this, we started this as a company called DART, Drone Assisted Response Team. And it was really a side project that we created this platform. And the goal was to bring volunteers together if there were missing children, or if there was a emergency, a disaster or whatever. How could we leverage these volunteers to bring together these powerful, and there really wasn't a business model to it. But as we started getting these number of volunteers that were coming into our system, they started asking us, well, is there business opportunities that you could send our way? I mean, is there other ways we could use this? And then we started getting phone calls from commercial prospects of, hey, do you have operators that you could deploy for us? And that's when we started realizing that there was a business opportunity there. Ironically enough, there's a reason the company is called DroneUp and not DART, which was the original name. Was we were launching on Monday, and I know a few of you know this story, but we were launching the company on Monday. Sunday morning, I get a phone call from my CIO, and he said, did you watch Shark Tank last night? And I said, no. And he said, Mark Cuban invested $250,000 into a drone company called DART. He obviously wasn't us. And we were like, how is this possible in this new industry? There's only like 6 companies in the entire industry. How is there 2 DARTs? And so in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, we changed the name to DroneUp to be a temporary placeholder, and it stuck. So that's where we are today.
Thanks. For what it's worth, I like DroneUp better.
Yeah, me too.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. So what do you know now that you didn't know at the time, and what was keeping you up at night in the early days?
Well, I said this a few years ago. I was being interviewed by somebody before I gave a speech, and they said, what do you call people in your industry? Do you call in this drone industry? Do you call yourselves pioneers, visionaries? And pardon my French, I said, I call us batshit crazy. And here's why. We started a business, not in an industry, not knowing what it was we were going to be selling. Really, we didn't know, to customers who didn't yet know what they were going to be buying in an industry the government had yet to figure out how to regulate. And so in the early days, the hardest job for me was the tap dancing when we were going out to investors and saying, hey, look, this is going to be really big. It's going to be great. We want you to invest. What's the business model? It's really complicated, Mr. Investor, but over the next couple of weeks after you invest, I'll start to explain to you how the business model works. And so I laid in bed at night trying to figure out exactly what the business model was, because at that point, we didn't really know what we were selling. Were we selling video? Were we selling data that we were collecting? What were we selling? And we didn't really know yet who those customers were. But I knew that there was an industry there We were just a little early, like a lot of companies in our industry have been. They knew they were in the right industry. They knew there was potential here. Some were just a little early, and as the industry has matured a little bit, and we've seen inflection points, hopefully more of those companies and more moving forward will survive in those early days. So survival was, yeah, I'd say it's something that kept me up at night.
So I guess a follow-up there. I mean, we can talk a little bit about the business model, sort of your vision for the company early on versus sort of what you're focused on today. And I think that's an interesting story too. But to get to where you were today, you had to build a team. And I think that's a challenge that all entrepreneurs face, and a lot of folks in the audience certainly face that challenge. How do you find the right people to help you sort of build the company and sort of join you on the journey?
Well, that was interesting too, because we've been very fortunate in our growth over the course of the last 5 years. We've had less than 1% turnover, and it's something that we're really proud of. I mean, we just had an audit this week or last week that came out. We're 51% diverse. We're 25% veterans or spouses of veterans, and less than 1% turnover rate, which we think is pretty incredible, and something that we attribute to multiple factors. But I think early on, what we really had to sell was the excitement of the industry and the vision, because we didn't have in fact, none of the employees, none of the original 4 employees even took a paycheck for the first year. So it was very much about getting people who were willing to get excited about a vision, willing to take a risk, and willing to understand that we were going to have to accept a lot of what I call battlefield failures in the early days, and get excited about those failures and keep leaning into it, even though for the first 2 or 3 years we didn't see a lot of success and we didn't see a lot of growth. We didn't see a lot of anything. Once we started seeing that growth, I told the team, and I told the investors, and I told everybody, the 2 most important things that we're going to have to focus on for the next 3 years are going to be people and money. And that's when I went out and hired what I believe to be the most talented chief people officer around, and the best chief financial officer. And I basically brought him in and said, here's exactly what you're worth. I know what your salary should be. I'm going to pay you about 1/4 of that, and I want you to believe in me. And I was very fortunate to have 2 very talented people who were willing to do that. Now I have an executive team of 6, including myself, of, I think, some of the brightest minds in the industry, and we were lucky to get them.
And so, who were the first people that you had that you onboarded?
So Joe Fuller, which was our CIO, he came on. He was the CIO at Dominion. He was a drone enthusiast. He came on board and was the first investor, and worked for a year without a paycheck. Then after that, it was Amy Wiegand and Anthony Vitone, and that was employee 2, 3, and 4 past myself. And I'm proud to say Joe retired last year from us, and is now spending time, the longest project I've ever seen anybody building a deck behind his house. But all of those other employees are there, including the next 2 employees. So all the original employees that were there from in year 3 are still there today, with the exception of.
How many employees do you have now?
205.
Okay. So you had mentioned earlier, you talked about talking to investors initially when there was no regulations in place, you didn't know your business model. Can you talk a little bit about that fundraising process, and then maybe about the one after that as well?
Yeah, so there was a series of friends and family rounds, convertible debt rounds, up until the investment from Walmart. And each one of those, it was interesting, because I think at first the initial investors kind of bought into my enthusiasm, even though I will candidly admit today I did not have a very defined that's not even fair to say. I didn't have a good business model at all. It was more about my belief that this was going to be a good industry, that we would develop patented technologies and that we would be ready to pivot towards where the revenue opportunities would materialize. And that was enough to get the early investors excited. And then when Joe and Anthony and others came on board, that's when we actually started defining business models, and their enthusiasm was infectious as well. And so in some of the subsequent rounds, it's not just Tom anymore. At this point, it's others who are very committed and very excited and very enthusiastic. I would argue our business model at that point had not yet really refined itself very well. And for us, it was literally about surviving. People say, when was the moment that things turned? When was the moment that you knew that the business was going to be real? And not that aha moment from 16 or 17, but when did the company suddenly, the trajectory turned? And that happened in 2019 when the pandemic hit. And that's when I think everybody began to realize that the opportunities that were ahead of us.
Got it. And a lot of that capital, I think the early capital came from angel investors and seed stage investors in Virginia. What does that local fundraising landscape look like? And what can be done to improve the ecosystem?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think our industry, unfortunately, in the last 5 years has often been referred to as the field of broken drone dreams, because there's been a lot of failures, and I'm one of those people that absolutely is saddened every time a company in our industry fails, because generally they're not failing because they have bad ideas. They're not failing because they're in the wrong industry. Oftentimes they're failing either because they were a little too early in the industry, or because they were primarily built around enabling technologies that were very, very valuable to the industry at large, but we were still trying to sell to ourselves when none of us had revenues to be buying from each other yet. And so I say all that to say, because we were in Hampton Roads, Virginia, rather than in Austin, rather than in Seattle, rather than in San Francisco, where a lot of the drone companies that in those days in Chicago were headquartered, it was a lot more difficult for us to raise capital. And people look at that as a negative. Well, how do we make it easier to raise capital? But the truth was, it kept us lean, it kept us efficient, and it kept us humbled, it kept us grounded, and candidly, it kept me scared. There was not an abundance of capital, especially in those early days where people out in California were raising money on the back of a napkin. I know that's an overused cliche, but it's true. I mean, they really were, where even when we went to CIT to apply for our investment from them, I mean, that was a multi-stage process with, we had to do presentations and serious interviews and due diligence, and they wanted paperwork and stuff. I mean, it was, it was more difficult, and I think in some ways served us well in those early days. I candidly was very fortunate to have access to a couple of investors who are well known in the area, who believed in the idea early, and because of that led to opportunities and introductions to others as we progressed through those first kind of slow 3 years.
And for the audience, in case you didn't know, when Tom refers to CIT, he's actually referring to VIPSI, or Virginia Venture Partners. We changed our name, I guess, 6 months or a year ago.
Okay, sorry.
No, I say CIT.
No, we say I catch myself saying CIT all the time. I'll get used to it eventually. So Tom, that's interesting. I'm gonna I don't know if you recall how we met and how the investment fund first engaged with DroneUp. I'll give everyone just a sort of quick background. So at the time, I had a Part 107. I was a volunteer firefighter and EMT out in a very rural county. And we ran a lot of search and rescue missions, and we're looking at drones to help us with those missions. And I actually signed up for the DroneUp platform. So it was one of the early adopters, and we saw that you were speaking at Virginia Tech, and frankly kind of stalked you a little bit because we wanted to meet, didn't know, we had heard that you might be fundraising and weren't sure. But it's an interesting, I think it's always interesting how investors identify companies that they ultimately make investments in. And that was kind of a unique story. But what attracted me to the DroneUp model was, and you kind of touched on this earlier, a lot of the companies, unmanned systems companies that we had looked at prior to our investment in DroneUp, were very much focused on investing heavily in airframes, aircraft, other types of, I guess I would say, infrastructure. And I think there was a question in our mind up until that point as to whether or not the industry was mature enough and ready to adopt all these technologies. And I think, I think we've kind of shown that a lot of companies were out in front of where the market was. But DroneUp's initial model was to sort of create a network of pilots, get them on the platform, and assign them to contracts and assign them to missions as appropriate, right? And there was a pivot, I think, certainly a pivot when you engaged with Walmart. But let's talk about sort of how that Walmart relationship evolved, and I guess what are some of the learnings? So when you start out with one model, you see an opportunity, you end up pivoting. What are some of the learnings from that process that other entrepreneurs in the audience might be able to take and apply to their own businesses?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I sometimes take issue with the pivot comment because, and not because, but I used it for a long time too. And now I'm questioning whether we actually pivoted or whether we diversified in our services. If we kind of look at it now as we were a drone services and technology company, we got 11 patents. I mean, obviously we're a software company, we're a hardware company, we're whatever. But people say, are you a services company or are you a delivery company? And I say we're a services company and delivery is one of the services, right? So in some ways, we don't view it as we pivoted to delivery, as rather once it became obvious there was a potential path, a viable business path for delivery or delivery as a service, then when you're given the opportunity to pursue that path by Fortune 1 and the world's largest retailer, you kind of assess whether or not you want to do it, and you don't assess long. And so the experience that we had in operating drones and tens of thousands of flights and knowing how to identify operators and bring them into our networks and how to partner with drone companies to get them to modify their platforms to fit our needs, that experience made the addition of delivery maybe a little more easy for us than other companies that were trying to come out of the gate as delivery, and build a delivery platform. And they didn't have the experience that we had. They didn't have the experience that we had with the FAA and learning the ins and outs of the FAA. So I view what happened with Walmart as, again, I mean, I can't say it enough. The pandemic that, created not just the incredible growth on our services side, but it is what created that opportunity on the delivery side. And like I tell my team all the time, maybe we weren't thinking about moving into delivery at that time. Maybe we weren't thinking about expanding internationally at that time. There was a lot of things we weren't thinking about, but you swing at the ball when it crosses the plate. And so we had to make the decisions a game time decision to take advantage of that opportunity.
So can you tell us about the relationship with Walmart and how it's evolved over time?
Yes, absolutely. So the first opportunity we had with Walmart, and this is probably something that most everybody is hearing for the first time, because now we finally are at a place where we can kind of talk about it, is as Walmart was assessing the drone space and where drones fit into the last mile. And if you think about it, we view the last mile as being a triangle, and the three parts of that triangle are drones, autonomous vehicles, and ultimately electric vehicles. That's the three pieces of the last mile. And the drone is one critical piece of that. And Walmart's approach was a little bit different, where Amazon and others had said, we're really going to focus on drones and drone delivery. Walmart's was really, we're going to focus on all pieces of it. The autonomous vehicles, you've seen their investment into electric vehicles, into other autonomous platforms, and middle mile autonomous and electric vehicles. And rather than trying to do all of those things in-house, they make very strategic investments and then partner with those companies and then put those companies together to try to build those ecosystems. It's a brilliant approach in my opinion. And so what they had been doing is assessing where the drone industry was. Was it mature enough yet to put their chips or their bets on a horse? And so during the months leading up to and after the pandemic, they went out to several drone companies and they said, we would like to give you the opportunity to conduct contactless free COVID test kit delivery. And we were very excited. We were one of a handful of companies that were given the opportunity to do it. And the goal for each one of us was to do a couple of hundred deliveries. And the other companies had some struggles early on in being able to get the operation up and running. We were very fortunate. Over that 9-week period, we did 1,350 residential deliveries of COVID test kits. Over that 9-week period, that was more residential deliveries of products than had been done by every other company combined the entire year. And that opportunity that we were given was just so spectacular. And I can't overemphasize that opportunity was given to us because of Operation Last Mile. So I think that's part of the reason that I like to call them CIT, because in our heart, CIT gave us that opportunity. So then they changed their identity and changed their name, and now it taints our story. But anyway, so within while we were still in the middle of that 9-week operation, Walmart came to us and said we would be interested in investing. That was in September, and in June we closed the investment with them. And it was two parts. It was a 9-figure investment, cash investment into the company, which was the largest cash investment that's been made into a drone company still today. It's a record, and a 9-figure contract to build out the drone delivery network, which is the largest drone services contract that's been signed to date. And we've opened the first 2 locations, one in Farmington, one in Bentonville, Arkansas at Store 100. And Rogers opens in Arkansas opens in 3 weeks, and then in the next couple of weeks you'll hear an announcement of what's next, and we're really, really excited about that announcement. It's going to be pretty significant news in the industry.
Great, thanks. I've got a couple more questions here, but it looks like I'm just looking at the chat here. It looks like there's a handful of questions. So Mark asked how many different paying customers DroneUp has, and there's also a question about insurance.
So we're very fortunate on the insurance side. We were able to start insuring all of our operations, even our independent contractors, about 3 years ago. So each flight that is flown from our independent contractors is insured from the time of takeoff until they land at $5 million in liability. And so we don't fly a single flight that isn't insured for that. Some of our more critical infrastructure flights, cell towers and others, are insured a little bit higher. We just completed facade inspections of 17 MGM Grand casinos, which was, imagine the largest 17 MGM casinos doing all the facade inspections with a drone, 33.4 million square feet of inspection. And that was done flying over people and moving vehicles and operations in Vegas and other areas like that. That was insured for a bit more, as you can imagine. But as far as the number of customers, I don't have that exact list right now. But I would, we have kind of 2 categories of customers on the services side. We have our enterprise customers where we're flying, we've got a contract to do 1,000 locations or 1,500 locations or whatever. We've got cell towers where we've got, we're contracted to do 5,000 cell towers. And then, so those enterprise customers, there's probably 20, maybe 25 of those. And then you have customers that come in and have us do just one-off projects. And there's probably several hundred of those. I don't know the exact number.
Great, thanks. And then Mark has a question. Tom, were you self-funded to begin when you started DroneUp? Was it self-funded?
Yeah, it was completely self-funded for the first 18 months, 24, almost 2 years.
Okay. I want to sort of touch on sort of some of the regulatory challenges. I mean, I know that the regulatory landscape in unmanned systems has evolved significantly over the last couple of years. What's been the biggest regulatory hurdle for DroneUp, and how do you think about and manage regulatory risk?
So that's, we're our company right now, we have, for a company our size, we're probably overstaffed on attorneys. So we have 3 full-time attorneys in-house and a paralegal. So we joke that we have our own little law firm in the building. But part of the reason is those regulatory issues. And in the early days, the problem was nobody really knew the rules. Everybody interpreted them a little bit differently. And when it was a small industry and it was, we weren't doing a lot of high volume work, that was okay, because you would kind of, we took the approach, and the military people on the call will appreciate this, the kind of buy your leave approach, sir. In other words, here's what we're doing. We're not asking, and we're doing it. And that was okay in the early years. But now when you start flying over, houses and into neighborhoods and all of the type of things that we're doing now, you really can't just take that, oops, if we're wrong, let us know approach, because it can destroy a business model. We've been very engaged with the FAA. We brief the FAA on a regular basis. In 2 weeks, I'll be up meeting with the FAA again and briefing them on what we're doing. We've been very transparent with them. We brief them on every major operation we do. We tell them what we did well. We tell them where we screwed up. And we've participated, for example, the recent Beyond Visual Line of Sight rulemaking committee. We were on that and chaired committees there. We are working with Congress next week, in 2 weeks rather, we'll be up speaking to the aviation subcommittee on what we think are the appropriate new rules moving forward. There's still a lot of confusion between, is there going to be type certification? Is it going to be special airworthiness? Is it going to be some means of compliance? So, the joke I made earlier about, not knowing what we're selling to customers and in an environment the government had yet figured out how to regulate, some would argue that hasn't changed much. We still don't have rules that allow us to fly beyond visual line of sight. We still don't have rules that allow us to, operate multiple different types of aircraft with a single operator in congested airspace. There are still some rules that are undefined that are constraining our industry. But I am excited because what we're seeing at the congressional level from the transportation committees in both sides of the House, from the aviation subcommittee and from the FAA, is an understanding that now we've reached the level where their regulations are actually inhibiting growth of the industry. And there is a willingness across all of those that we're seeing in a very clear fashion to assist us in the enablement of the industry. And I anticipate, people ask me, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, when do you think we'll be flying beyond visual line of sight? I would have told you that not within the next 5 years. If you asked me today, when we'll be flying beyond visual line of sight, I'm not saying you'll be flying 10 or 20 miles, but I believe that people will be flying 3 miles, perhaps by the end of next year.
Could you talk a little bit about the state of retail drone delivery and what you think the future looks like?
And what was the last part of that? I'm sorry.
And what do you think it looks like in the next year or two?
Yeah. So, the most positive thing that we've been able to, part of the reason why people ask, why are we doing these operations where we're doing these deliveries at the 1.5 mile range, and how much damage can you actually do in 1.5 miles in terms of penetrating the market and the total addressable market? And here's what I would say is, we're building our systems in order to be able to go as far as we can possibly go, as far as the regulations will allow. But what we're doing right now is we're doing a lot of things that needed to be done. One was we are demonstrating customer acceptance. We are demonstrating the ability to put numbers on the board safely. And those are very important things we believe for our industry. And so when you talk about where it is today, the problem is how do we achieve affordable last mile delivery by drones, right? I mean, right now, I know what it costs us per flight to do these deliveries. That's not a scalable number long term. But what we are seeing is the number of orders that into communities as the word gets out, as they realize, and we engage the community and tell them we're not recording, we're not taking videos and pictures. As they begin to realize the noise level is inconsistent with what the narrative had been all along, that it was going to be all this buzzing and noise. I mean, you got to keep in mind, our delivery, we take off and we're flying at about 250 feet. We lower down to 100 feet, and then the package is slowly lowered to the ground and then brought back up. We've actually had numerous people say we didn't even know the drone had delivered the product till we opened the back door and it was sitting on the back porch. So part of the retail industry's ability to really grow is overcoming some of those fears of privacy, fears of noise, fears of airspace congestion and drones falling out of the sky. And so we think what we're doing is very important. And again, if you look at where it fits in that last mile, I'll tell you in Arkansas, for example, right now, we're delivering, our average delivery time is 27 minutes from the time the order is placed until the product is delivered at the door. And that's consistently sub 30-minute delivery. And I can tell you, when you start seeing orders like diapers coming in at 9 o'clock, babies Tylenol, children's Motrin, you get why this can be so impactful. We actually had an order last night that we giggled. We called this the tough day order. We had an order that came through last night, and it was feminine products, preparation H, and chocolate covered peanuts. And somebody forwarded that to me and said this was a tough day for somebody. So we get to see a lot of what people will order when they can get that 30-minute package delivery. The other thing I'll tell you when we talk about retail delivery is we're getting ready to start delivering over-the-counter medications, which is something I've been lobbying for. You guys at VIPC know I've been lobbying for this for a long time, which is 60% of prescription or 60% over-the-counter medications are sold during flu season. When all of these people with every flu symptom in the world are walking into pharmacies to get these over-the-counter medications, creating these pharmaceutical petri dishes. We have successfully negotiated with the pharmaceutical board in Arkansas to allow us to start delivering over-the-counter treatments of those medications via drone. We think that's going to have a positive impact on society. And then starting in May, we'll be delivering certain prescription medications as well. So it's expanding. We're also starting food delivery in March or in May as well, or this month. So
How long until we get drone delivery in Northern Virginia?
Ask me in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Or you probably won't have to ask me in 2 weeks, but wait 2 weeks.
All right. Sounds good. We've got a couple more questions in the chat. I'm going to ask you about finding the right partner first, though. So what advice do you have for founders or companies as they evaluate strategic partnerships? And how do you find the right partner? And when do you know that you're working with the right partner?
That's a great question. In our industry, it's even more, I would say it's been even more challenging because first off, all of us were in this new industry. All of us had kind of new products. You never really know when you meet somebody because they tell you we're great. We got a great product. We're funded. We're strong. We're going to be around and we want to be a good partner. And the truth is we're all salespeople in the industry when we're early, right? So how much of that is real and how much of that is not real is always a challenge. And then once you get through figuring all that out, then you've got to figure out, are we fundamentally aligned in the way we approach business and what our strategy is? And are we looking for short-term wins, long-term wins? And do we have what I call the integrity barometer match in terms of being willing to be candid and open with each other? Those things are most important, but I'll tell you, we've interviewed and assessed and went through kind of the early dating process with over 200 partners throughout the world. And the one thing that we all agree on is that our team would not move forward in a partnership until we spent the day and had either lunch or dinner with a partner. It's kind of our policy before we move forward. And it's amazing how many of those final sit down and lunch and dinners made the decision to go one way or the other in terms of our partnership. So I would always strongly encourage. I thought it was kind of a silly little thing when it was brought to me as a suggestion, but we've literally traveled around the world just to have a lunch or a dinner with somebody before executing a partnership. And there's nothing more disappointing than getting back on that plane and flying 13 hours back, deciding that it wasn't the right thing to do, but it's worth it to figure it out and to only lose the 13 hours of the flight back rather than have a bad partnership.
So I love that, emphasizing the importance of relationships. I think a lot of people get caught up in financial and legal diligence when they're evaluating a partner. But I think you make a really good point. Jen, do you want to jump to some of the audience questions?
Sure. Ann Rosenblum asked about weather conditions and how they affect your last mile delivery business, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah. So right now, our drones have evolved quite a bit. We're actually getting ready to move to what we call our V2 Prism, which is funny because we're innovating so fast that the version we're using right now, we keep saying is so 2021 because it rolled out in November of 21. We're getting ready to roll out our new version today. And then we're excited because we're really excited about the next generation, which is a helicopter drone with vertical props on it. That's it's slick and flies 100 miles an hour. It can handle up to 50-mile-an-hour wind, heavy downpour, heavy rain. So we're moving towards that. Right now, the drones that we're flying can handle up to about 30-mile-an-hour winds, light rain, light snow. But generally we don't fly in those conditions, not because the drone can't handle it, but because of visibility requirements under FAA regulations. So, but once we can fly beyond visual line of sight, so we're moving more from a visual flight to an instrument flight, the drone that we will be operating by that time will be able to handle pretty much up to the limits that I just said. We'll fly up to 40-mile-an-hour wind and heavy rain. But that'll be mid 2024, a little bit later.
And then Stephen Mobley asked, besides drone delivery, what do you see the major opportunities for drones over the next 5 years?
Public safety, public safety, public safety. It was up until recently, there's been this kind of, gap between how do we use drones in public safety? How do we balance privacy and how do we balance responsible use of these assets? But now, because the drones that we're creating today have such unique capabilities, for example, the one that we're in testing with right now has a 2-hour flight time, can fly 90 miles an hour, can carry multiple packages. It can also be preloaded with AED, Narcan, EpiPens, and you name it. And so we can deploy these drones. It can be in the air and on site within 10 miles, just about in any direction in under 2 minutes, both preloaded with a limited amount of emergency first responder supplies, but also with high resolution cameras that can begin to stream in broad bandwidth back to the emergency command centers or back to, the 911 centers, the actual situation on the ground. I think those type of capabilities, those long range flights with those heavier payload capacities and the ability to deploy as quickly as they can, I think that's going to create public safety and first responder activities that we haven't quite been able to truly enable because of the limited capability of some of our existing drones. For example, when we were delivering the COVID test kit delivery, our maximum weight we could carry was about 1 pound. Today, we're delivering 10 pounds. By the end of next year, we'll be able to carry about 20. So.
Another question from the audience is around hours of operation limitations. Is that completely FAA regulated, or are there also state and county controls there too?
Well, the state and county has no control over drone operations other than the ability to say where you can take off and where you can land. The airspace is controlled by the FAA. Sometimes we've noticed, and you guys probably have heard of that, municipalities don't always realize that, and they pass certain drone regulations say you can't operate drones here in these particular areas, but that's really controlled by the FAA. We always try to honor the request of the municipalities, even though we don't necessarily have to, but it's important. But back to the hours of operation, we operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are no day or nighttime or limitations on when we do deliver. In fact, we prefer to do our deliveries at night because there's less traffic, there's fewer people, and it's easier to identify. And there's generally the areas of delivery are much more open.
Can I take us back to Walmart for a minute? They're obviously an investor in your company, and just wondered how taking that strategic investment impacts where you focus your energy in terms of customers.
Well, they're a minority investor, but they're a large investor. So we are focusing if you look at the efforts of the company, we've pretty much successfully bifurcated it 50% on traditional drone services, 50% on delivery. Obviously, there's an enormous effort expended every day to meet the customer or Walmart's demands, because they're not just an investor, but they're also a customer, right? So we also have a contract with them. And because of the influence that has, it brings in other customers and other opportunities. So we appropriately respect Walmart as an investor and as a customer, and we're so grateful for the partnership. But I will tell you that one of the missions, and I know Walmart would not mind me saying this if they heard me say this, one of the things I tell my team every day is make Walmart my smallest customer, not by making them spend less or invest less, but listen, the Walmart should not be, 70% of our revenues 2 years from now.
Excellent. I just want to encourage the audience. We've only got about 6 minutes left. So if you have any additional questions for Tom, please post them in the chat. I'll ask a question about just sort of the future of unmanned systems in the industry in general. Where do you think things are headed beyond delivery, of course?
Yeah, so I think that we're going to see I think it's going to be a phase thing. And the biggest question I always get asked is, when will we be riding in unmanned taxis, right? When are we going to have urban air mobility? And I'll answer that question, but you're going to start to see, first off, the last mile. I think you're going to see what we're doing start to expand. I tell people all the time, let's quit trying to take BVLOS and go from 1.5 miles to 10 miles. How about let's go from 1.5 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Let's put numbers on the board and prove it. I think you're going to see that. But I also think you're going to start to see middle mile drone operations, slightly heavier cargo operating point to point between distribution centers, drones that are bigger than the 55 pounds that are going to be carrying 100 to 200 pounds of payload between distribution centers in fixed flight, fixed flight paths. I think that'll be the next thing we'll see. In terms of urban air mobility and transporting personnel, I'll tell you a quick story. In 1939, if you guys know a little bit of history on the autonomous vehicles, at the World's Fair was the first time a self-driving vehicle was displayed in public. It drove around the World's Fair for months and months and months. And everybody went, ooh, the Jetsons, we're going to be riding in these things. We're going to have cars driving us around all over the place. It's going to happen in a matter of years. It's almost here. 80 years later, almost to the day, I was standing in front of the Virgin Hotel in San Francisco, waiting for this self-driving vehicle to come pick me and 2 others up to take us to give a speech. And it only had to drive 238 feet from the parking lot to the front of the hotel. And in that 238 feet, it sideswiped a parking meter and took out the back tire of a California Highway Patrol motorcycle. And if in 80 years, I can't get a vehicle to drive 238 feet to pick me up, are we even remotely ready to get into a multidimensional environment, into these self-driving autonomous? I predict that it's at least 10 years away. Do I think that we'll have autonomous helicopters that have a pilot sitting behind the panel and the autonomy is controlling it and moving people around? I do believe that that's probably more near term, but fully autonomous self-driving urban air mobility is I hope and pray, many years away.
So that raises an interesting question. Do you see a scenario where the majority of logistics transportation is handled in maybe a multimodal autonomous environment? And
I'm sorry, I don't understand. I didn't understand.
so I'm thinking we spent a lot of time talking about unmanned air systems, and I'm just wondering about other unmanned systems,
Right.
and how sort of the multimodality sort of aspects of delivery and other unmanned operations.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're doing now is working on a really cool project where we are combining forces with autonomous vehicles on the ground and aerial vehicles. So right now, in some states, the regulation are for the autonomous vehicle to do deliveries. There's two issues. One, it has to have a spotter vehicle, and two, it can only make right turns, right? Well, and the question always gets asked, well, what happens if it makes a right turn and then it gets blocked? Well, the entire system has to be shut down while they fix that issue. So one of the projects we're working on now is, instead of having this is why I always laugh, because they have this autonomous vehicle, which is green, environmentally friendly and safe, and it's being followed around by a fuel powered vehicle as its spotter vehicle, right? So what we're working on, and we're doing this, we're getting ready to launch this in one particular state, is we're going to be flying the autonomous vehicles in the air, doing deliveries and doing all the traditional things we're doing, while also providing aerial surveillance feedback to the autonomous vehicle on the ground to give them the ability to determine if there is in fact better routes because of unforeseen, a tree has fallen over, a road is flooded, there's suddenly a car that's disabled in the middle, to allow them to be more optimal in their route. And then in addition to that, providing microclimate data back to these to a center that's going to allow them to make more rapid decisions about potentially game-changing meteorological events that they don't have the capability to process as quickly. So there's a lot of collaboration going on between those different assets in the air and on the ground.
Great, thanks. I see we've got two quick questions in the audience, then I want to get some parting thoughts from you. First question is from Caitlin. She asked, how are you maintaining a strong culture as you scale?
It's a great question. And I will tell you, that is one of the biggest challenges. The biggest challenges is how do we keep that culture we had at 6, at 12, at 20, 50, 100, and 200. And we actually have resources on our team in our people division whose sole job is to focus on that. We're not throwing parties or doing things like that. But what we do is we really drive a culture of respect for each other, drive a culture of being able to hold each other accountable, both recognizing when somebody does something superlative, but working with those on our team that are maybe falling a little bit short to help them. And we've created this culture of it's almost like people surround people when they realize they're not maybe performing at the level or fitting in, and kind of self-heal that. And it's a really interesting culture that I give Chris Cravey, our chief people officer, an enormous amount of credit for. It's all about respect for each other. It's all about hiring, not based on anything other than there's two foundations for hiring in our organization. It is, number one, will you fit in the culture? Number two, do you have the talent set to succeed? And we start with culture hires, and then that's the first check that has to be checked off.
That's great. Thank you. And last question from the audience. Rob asks about policy variances between states and regions.
It's a great question. We deal with that. When we are moving into a new market, we have this 36-point metric that we analyze that has everything to do with airspace friendliness, environmental conditions, you name it, all the way down to state and local municipality acceptance, state and local municipality alignment. In other words, are we going to have one position from the state in terms of how they view policy and a different one down on the ground level? The good news about that is this is starting to be resolved. There were so many knee-jerk policies that were passed in 17, 18, and 19. For example, in Arkansas, you are not allowed to take a video or a picture of private property from the air without the property owner's consent. So if you're trying to do a video assessment of a parking lot or a building and you just happen to catch the edge of a piece of private property, you're not allowed to retain that data unless you go get the property owner's permission. If you guys follow the rules, that was the rule in Texas. It was just repealed by the state. We believe that with the support of Governor Hutchinson in Arkansas, we're going to have it repealed in Arkansas. And a lot of those municipalities that kind of passed those laws that really weren't even, they really didn't even have the authority to do, we're seeing those repealed. So we're starting to see some nationwide alignment on policies. And I think as the FAA becomes a little more clear on its rules, and as we continue to do, and I mean, we as our industry continue to do our efforts in going out into the communities and helping them better understand what we do, I think we're going to overcome that. And I think we'll see more consistent policy applications.
Thanks, Tom. Final question. Any parting advice to the founders in the audience?
I would just say, take advantage of every opportunity that comes along. I mean, I think for us, for example, when the pandemic hit, there was a severe sense of concern in our company and fear that at this time and where we were, and we were on, we were always on the cusp of survival. People go, when were you on the cusp of success? I'm like, I still don't feel that way today. I mean, when people say congratulations on your success, I'm like, we're not successful yet. We still got a whole lot of work to do. But I think one of the things that our team did a good job was, once we realized that we were going into lockdown and all of this was happening, we regrouped, and rather than say, how do we go into defensive mode? How do we get in a mode where we're going to be able to survive this? We literally came together as a team and said, as awful as this is, how do we thrive? How do we take this opportunity to grow the company? How do we take this opportunity to expand and to become closer to the success that we want? And we were able to do that. And so I think that was a lesson that I learned, and it's a lesson that I would remind other entrepreneurs, that whatever the storm is, there's a way to take advantage of that storm. It may not be obvious right away, but there is.
Thanks,
That's great
Tom.
advice. Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for sharing your founding journey with us. And I can't wait to have something delivered to me by a drone, I guess, in 2 weeks, hopefully. Before we jump into small groups, I wanted to turn it over for a couple minutes to my friends, Evan McMillian and Ian Fraser from 757 Accelerate, to talk about what they're working on.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Always good to hear your story. So thanks so much for that tough act to follow. So Ian and I'm the executive director, and Ian is the program manager at 757 Accelerate. And like Mary and her team at Ramp, we are have applications open for a 12-week intensive, selective, mentor-driven startup acceleration program. And we are looking to fill cohort 5. We've had some really great success with cohorts 1 through 4. We've accelerated 25 companies that have gone on to raise over 52 million in capital and are right around 20 million in revenue generated. So we are located, we offer a hybrid program. So some of the time you need to be in person, but a good deal of the time we offer hybrid programming to allow you to build your bit. There's a drone delivery at my door. To help you build your business at the same time that you're growing your business. So as we said yesterday, we're trying really hard to give people the opportunity to really work on the business, as well as make sure that they aren't losing the momentum they've built in the business. So we, our applications are open, and we run the program from the 29th of August to the Friday before Thanksgiving. I think it's 18th of November. We give away $20,000 to each of the companies, non-dilutive. We come alongside, we've accelerated a significant number of companies that VIPC, through both their GAP funds and their Virginia Founders Fund and the CCF grants, have also invested in. We take a lot of ICAP success stories and take them to the next level. And we take, one of our differentiators is that we take all of our companies on a 5-city roadshow tour. So a good old fashioned bus ride where we go to the investors. So we're able to introduce our startups to between 50 and 65 investors from Raleigh, Durham, Charlottesville, Richmond, Hampton Roads, and Northern Virginia. So that network grows all the time. So we're sort of excited. I mean, we've done a ton of collaborations with VIPC over the years, been a big fan of these Friday morning coffees, and would love to talk to any of you that are interested in learning more about the accelerator. I would say, happy to answer any questions about where our sweet spot is, but, not always interested in the monologue. Happy to hear your questions. Ian, what'd I forget?
I would say, people ask us how we differentiate ourselves from like a Techstars or a Y Combinator. And I would say a lot of times you have to fit perfectly into their process. We try to, make the process fit you. And, a lot of times we'll have companies at different stages within a single cohort, but it works well because we try to just meet you where you are, rather than expect you to be a certain place or be at a certain level of understanding.
Yeah, smaller cohorts allow us to deliver some real customized programming. So happy to answer any of your questions. We have information session coming up on May 28th, but you can always reach out to us. We on our website, 757accelerate.org. We have a ton of information, and we know that building startups is a contact sport, and so it's been a real privilege to come alongside a lot of you and grow the company from a non-equity stake and deliver you sort of out to a network pitch ready to people who are looking to be, your sort of really engaged, supportive investors.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Ian. You all know that I love an accelerator and I love the ICAP program as well. I'm going to break us into small groups, but I also wanted to mention that part of my team, Virginia Venture Partners, will be in Roanoke Thursday and Friday next week. So if you're in the Roanoke-Blacksburg area and want to pitch us your startup, drop me a line and I'll make it happen. If you haven't been with us for a long time on these coffees, small groups are just the opportunity to join a breakout room and sort of go around the room and introduce yourself, what your company does, and then, help each other grow your companies. And you should see a pop-up in a second.
Thanks again, Tom.